Leverage is brought to you in part by Emil C. Brown Media, helping you develop and deploy impactful stories.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for this inaugural podcast of Leverage with Damon Williams. So a little bit about myself. Born and raised here in Houston. I am an entrepreneur and the founder of Touchpoint Strategies. Touchpoint is a professional services firm. We sort of specialize in three areas: public-private partnerships, public engagement, and business process outsourcing, which is a fancy way of saying that we help companies, governments, and communities to connect around those things that profit them all. That's part of why this Leverage podcast is so important to me, because it represents the connection, the meeting point with business, politics, and the culture. So being a kid of the 80s, being really steeped in this culture, this is an opportunity for us to explore a little bit, not just what's going on, but how it relates to us and as a people and as members of this culture. And most importantly, how do we use this information to build wealth and pass it generationally? So today, our first guest is a good friend of mine. We are not just friends, but members of an organization together. And I'm going to give him a chance to tell you a little bit about him, but let me give you some critical information about JD Garnier. JD is an investment advisor. It's been an investment advisor for more than 2 decades, not just in the way that you normally interface or hear of interfacing with a certified financial planner, but in some really interesting ways that we're going to explore today as we look at the role of entrepreneurship in wealth building and in entrepreneurship in the ongoing sustaining of the Black community and our culture. So with that, welcome, JD.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I think this is a discussion that is necessary for us to move and advance our culture forward. So I appreciate you having me.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. This is a chance to have people get a little piece of the conversations that we have. Our friend, we're blessed and fortunate to have a friend group of pretty extraordinary entrepreneurs and leaders. So this is just to capture a little bit of that. Right. Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about what it means to be a certified financial planner and what it is that you do.
There are a lot of people that, call themselves advisors or a part of the financial services community. For me personally, I look at my role as almost an accountability partner for clients. And, I've been fortunate enough in my career to work with people across the spectrum. I've worked with families just starting out their life, trying to figure out how they were going to make it. The clients were tens of millions of dollars, thinking about their legacy and how they're going to protect it. And, what I've discovered, regardless of what side of the spectrum that you stand on, the thing that people, are trying to make or manage or protect is not necessarily money. It's not really wealth, it's value.
Wow.
People were either trying to create or protect value. And so I spend a lot of my time, even before we get to actually managing the assets, talking about investing, all of the technical skills that go into what I do, helping people understand what that value is.
Wow.
And so that's a big part of what I do.
So walk me through a little bit of that. So how do we determine what value is in a world where, it's been pretty binary, right? It's either you have money or you don't. Right. You have enough of that money that it's considered wealth, or you don't. What's value?
Well, so let's break it down, right? Because, a lot of times I think we confuse or conflate the difference between being rich and being wealthy, right? But they're two completely different things, right? Rich is the abundance of resources and money. You have a lot of money, you have a lot of resources, you're rich, right? You can go viral and be rich, right? You can be good at a job and somebody pays you millions of dollars, you can be rich. But as long as that income is directly tied to your work, to your labor and your effort, you can't be wealthy, because the minute you stop working, the income stops. And so if rich is the abundance of resources and money, wealth is the separation of time and money.
Come on.
And so you don't become wealthy until your income, until your resources, until your value increases without the requirement of your time.
So when I can put my time toward those things that are most important to me versus what's most important to making more resource,
correct,
then I'm wealthy.
You are wealthy when you control your time and your resources and value increase without you having to work for it. And so the only logical question in somebody's mind after that is, okay, how do I separate the two?
Yeah.
And the answer is to own things of value, right? That's that word again, value. And we call those things assets, right?
Okay.
There's only 3 ways to acquire assets. You can buy assets, you can create assets, or you can become an asset. Now, we all start from nothing. So the only thing we have when we come into this world is our human capital. And so the first thing we have to do is become an asset, right? That's where education is important. That's where building yourself up in whatever profession, building your business, right? The failures of life prepare you to become an asset. That increases your earning potential. And then you take that earning potential and you either buy assets or you create assets. That's the only 2 options. And then as your earning increases, you just continue to repeat the process, right?
Wow.
But it comes down to owning things of value.
Man, that's an amazing differential.
Man, that's amazing.
Okay. So that's an amazing differential to explore. So, and I want to touch on a couple of things with that. One, how does that, as in your role as a CFP, as an accountability partner, what does that look like when you're interacting with somebody who's on their way up? And then you have another certification that I find fascinating, right? Certified Exit Planning Advisor. And I want to talk a little bit about what that means and what role that plays in our community and in our culture. So let's start with if I'm on my way up and I come to see a CFP, I come to see JD Garnier, what's our interaction like?
The first conversation is really about you, right? We have to understand, number one, where you are, but then secondly, where do you want to be, right? Financially, professionally, right? And then personally. And it really comes down to mathematics, right? If you're in a certain place, what resources do you have available to get you to the next place? If it's just the income, then we have to figure out a way to grow that income, right? If there are other resources available, we have to figure out that. And so, for a person, whether they're a business owner or a working professional, right, we have to determine what financial resources you have available to get you to that level, and what human capital or personal resources you have to increase that. And then we come out with a plan. Right. Most people start with a strategy. Yeah. Right. I should invest in this. I should buy this. I should do this. And a lot of times those strategies are good, but if they're not a part of a comprehensive plan, then they're just one-offs. And so the first interaction is understanding just the foundation of where somebody wants to be and coming up with a plan. And that plan is going to determine which strategies are necessary to get us there, whether we're talking about investing, talking about estate planning, we're talking about tax minimization strategies. Again, all of the technical things that go into what I do. Right. But that conversation can't happen until I first understand where somebody wants to be financially and what resources they have available.
We live in an interesting time right now, right? So strategically speaking, the gram got it all, right? Like I hear every strategy under the sun,
right,
on social media,
right.
So is it possible for me to experience a great strategy, follow it perfectly, get the outcome, and it still not be on my plan? Still not be helpful for me.
I meet people like that all the time. I sit down with clients that are worth millions of dollars. And over the course of their life, they've made a bunch of individual financial decisions that have been good individually, But when you look at it in the aggregate, there are gaps or there are holes in it. And so that's why I mentioned, even at that level of wealth, you're concerned about your legacy.
Right.
You're concerned about how you can protect it, how you can transfer it, right? And so even if you're lucky enough to get a strategy in place, right, if you don't have a comprehensive plan, there are going to be holes that put you at risk.
So when we're talking, so let's dive into that, right? So really, it's kind of legacy building. The difference between building your business and building your legacy, and preserving your business and preserving your legacy. In your exit planning function, like in that role, what does that look like as it relates to our community? What made you go and get that certification?
Well, I'll give you a few numbers to make it make sense, and then I'll tell you why it resonates with me. 50% of businesses end involuntarily through death, divorce, disability, dissolution, or there's one other D. But essentially, business owners' business ends without them having anything to do with it.
Wow.
And most times that's because they do not have a plan in place. And so if you're fortunate enough to build up a business that generates income, that has some type of value, you want to be able to protect that value, either to transfer it to the next generation or to sell it on an open market so that you can benefit from all of that hard work. Most people don't do that. I just said 50% of businesses end without any plan in place.
Wow.
Secondly, only 30% of businesses survive the second generation. And that's because most generationally, our children, right, have different interests than us. If you've built up this great restaurant or this great company over 20 or 30 years, your children may have completely different interests. So how do you protect that value if your kids want nothing to do with that business, right? And so just those types of statistics, those are in the aggregate. When we talk specifically about the Black community, it's what is the term, right? When the world catches a cold, we get the flu.
Yeah, right.
Right. There's over 2.5 million Black-owned businesses in this country, and only 5% of them have employees. So what that tells me is that 95% of the business ownership in our community is tied up into the value of one person.
Wow.
And it doesn't matter if that income individual makes $50,000 in that business or $5 million. If that value is tied up in one person, if something happens to that person,
it's a wrap.
The value of the business is gone.
Wow.
And so how do you extract that value and transfer it in a way that helps us to build generational wealth? And so that resonated with me throughout my entire career.
Right.
And so I felt like having the skill set to be able to help a business owner exit their business in a way where they can get the value of all of that hard work to benefit them and their family, I think that's necessary.
Wow, man. It's such an interesting time. I say that a lot, when I'm talking to my kids, to, young people, and to think about just in a generation, right? When we came along, wisdom from the elders before us was, go to school, get a good job, try to retire, and it was about sustenance. It was about not being in a position where you had to rely on the government just to live in your old age.
Right.
We came along during the time when that balloon kind of burst, right? The concept of going someplace and staying there for 30 years and retiring in the 90s really went away.
Right.
And we became the sort of job hopping for value to grow and build something on our own. To now see this conversation have progressed to, one, value from the standpoint of quality of life and what's important to you being different than your labor, and having professionals to help with that is just amazing. That
just shows you how two generations, how much things can change.
Right. So let's talk about that, how that impacts the culture. Unfortunately, we all know the negative side of what happens when wealth doesn't get passed along, or when great grandmama had property, and it passed to everybody, and nobody pays the taxes, and the family loses the property. We hear those stories all the time.
Right.
what does it mean when this is done well? Like, what does it mean? We talk, like, you hear that term generational wealth.
Yes.
Right? What does that actually mean for those who get it on the back end, like to be a recipient?
Well, what it means, and you know, we use that term a lot, but we never really define it, right? Generational wealth is the transfer of value from one generation to the next. That's that word again, right? And, you know, when it's done responsibly, you put the next generation in a better position to be able to manage resources to propel them further than you were able to go.
Right.
And so those resources are value, which is the representation of the assets that we own when we pass, but then it's also values, right?
Right.
What life principles do you stand for? Right? Do you believe them? I've never had anybody say, I want to leave my kids all this money, but I don't want to leave them anything to live by.
Right.
Right. So it's not just value, it's values. And then the last thing is valuables, right? The things that money cannot buy, the wisdom, the advice, the time, the love, the connection, right? The understanding of what has happened before us. And so all of those three things encompass what generational wealth is. When it's done properly, not only do you have the resources, but now you have an appreciation of where you came from, right? And you can see it. And now that appreciation gives a responsibility, right? To carry it forward to the next generation. And you're not starting over from scratch every single time.
Man, it's amazing to hear you talk about, you know, wealth in those terms. You know, we're part of an organization together. For those listeners, there's a political action committee based here in Houston that's now, you know, moving things on a national level called KeyPack, and JD and I are both members. But what struck me in your conversation is about wealth. Is this the same conversation that we have in the pack around influence, access, influence, and power? Right.
Right.
Because wealth and power are radically different things. You know. Right. Having the money to get into something and being given access to it are very different things. So one of the things that, you know, why we set this podcast up was to explore those pieces both independently and collectively. So when we're talking about passing value, right, on to the next generation, listeners, you know, if you could just think about when we look at powerful families, when we look at families that have had generational impact on this country, on our culture, what is it that really is passed on? Right? What's the key piece? Is it the money? After a certain level, it's not money, right? It's relationships, it's experience, it's access, it's power, right? And those things are built much the same way you talked about. You can execute individual strategies well, and get these little gains or even big gains, you know, throughout the course of a life. But at the end of the day, what does it all come together to form? Exactly. My position on that is what it comes together to form is leverage. Right? That's the operating thesis for this whole podcast. It's not one or the other. It's not business or politics. It's not culture or the others. It's business, politics, and culture woven together to create the leverage that we all use right now in real time in our lives. Right. So with that, I want to thank you for coming on today. How do people contact you if they need to, if they're on the way up, or if they've got there and they're looking at how do they pass on what they've built with that blood and sweat and tears? Right. You can contact me directly. You can call my office or email me, and you know, I would be happy to meet with anyone. You know, my email is jd.garnier@ml.com. That's jd.garnier@ml.com. Or you can call my office directly, 281-364-2195. And I'd be happy to have a conversation with you no matter where you are in your stage of wealth. Okay. And ml.com, that's Merrill Lynch, right? That is correct. All right. So yeah, that's thank you so much for that. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, we end. Reach out to JD Garnier if you have any financial planning or needs, or you're looking to figure out how to exit your business and make sure that your value is captured. So with that, we'll conclude our first podcast here on the S3 Network.